The morning I signed the papers in the lake house, I sat in my truck for a long time before I drove away. I just sat there with the engine off, looking at the water through the windshield. It was October, and the birches along the shoreline had gone gold, and the surface of the lake was so still it looked like something poured. I was 63 years old. My wife had been gone for 2 years. I had spent 31 of those years working as a civil engineer for the county, and I had spent most of those same years telling myself that one day I would stop. One day I would find a piece of land that felt like it was waiting for me. This was it. 12 acres in northern Wisconsin, 40 minutes from the nearest town of any size, with a 2-bedroom cottage that needed work and a dock that needed more. The previous owners had kept it as a summer place, and you could tell the kind of neglect that comes not from poverty, but from indifference. A screen door that didn't close right. A water heater from another decade, but the bones of it were solid, and the land was the kind of land that makes you want to be quiet. I had not told my son-in-law about the purchase until after it was done. That was deliberate. My daughter, Lynette, had married him 4 years earlier. His name was Ray. And Ray was the kind of man who treated every conversation like a negotiation he intended to win. He sold commercial real estate in the suburbs of Milwaukee, and he was good at it, which meant he had learned to speak about other people's property as though his familiarity with it gave him some claim to it. He had opinions about everything: my retirement accounts, my Medicare supplement, the resale value of my old house in Waukesha. He once told me at Thanksgiving that I was sitting on untapped equity. I had been sitting on my own couch at the time. Lynette was my only child. Her mother and I had raised her to be kind, and she was genuinely kind, the sort of person who remembers the names of waitstaff and sends handwritten notes. But she had a blind spot where Ray was concerned, a willingness to sand down her own edges whenever he pushed. And I had watched it happen slowly over 4 years, the way you watch a shoreline erode. You notice it, and then you stop saying anything because saying something only makes the water rougher. When I told her about the lake house, she was happy for me. I could hear it in her voice. Real happiness. The uncomplicated kind. She asked about the dock and whether the cottage had a fireplace and whether I'd be lonely that far out. Ray got on the phone about 30 seconds later. So what are we talking, square footage? I told him. And you're on the lake directly, not a shared access situation? I told him it was direct frontage, about 200 feet of it. There was a pause, the kind of pause I had learned to recognize. The kind where he was doing math. That's actually a significant asset, he said in the tone of a man conferring a compliment on someone who hadn't asked for one. Waterfront in that county has been appreciating steadily. You bought at a good time. I know, I said. I live here. He laughed. Ray always laughed when I said something that landed wrong for him. It was a management technique. I drove up in November with a truckload of tools and spent 3 weeks doing the work the place needed. I replaced the water heater. I rehung the screen door. I pulled up the rotted boards on the dock and put down new ones. I stacked firewood until my back told me to stop, and then I stacked a little more. In the evenings, I would make coffee and sit on the dock in my work coat and watch the light go off the water. And I would think about my wife, Carolyn, and how much she would have loved this. She'd always wanted somewhere quiet. We had always said someday. Someday had come. It had just come without her. That first winter, I got the hang of the roads, the neighbors, and the particular silence of 12 acres. When the snow is down and the lake has frozen over, and the whole world seems to be holding its breath. I drove into town twice a week. I joined a Thursday morning coffee group at a diner called Keller's that mostly consisted of retired men arguing pleasantly about local politics. I started sleeping well for the first time in years. In February, Ray called me. So listen, he said, which was how Ray began sentences he had rehearsed. Lynette and I have been talking, and we think it might make sense for her parents to come stay with us for a while. Her mom's having some trouble with her hip, and her dad's not in great shape either. The thing is, our house is already pretty tight with the kids, and we were thinking... He paused here for effect, or maybe for courage. Your lake place has 2 bedrooms. You're only using 1. And you're up there by yourself. It would actually be good for you to have company. I let the silence sit for a moment. Ray, I said, that's my home. Right, no, obviously I just mean on a temporary basis. 3 months, maybe 4, just until we figure out a longer-term situation for them. I don't think that's going to work, I said. Another pause. Then, can I ask why not? I told him that I had structured my retirement around having my own space, that I had made significant improvements to the property, and that I was not in a position to host long-term guests. They're not guests, he said. They're family. They're your family, I said, and I wish them well, but this is my property. Ray was quiet for what felt like a long time. Then he said, very evenly, I think you should talk to Lynette about this. He put her on the phone. She asked me gently if I was sure, and I told her I was, and she said she understood, and I believed her when she said it. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. In March, I drove down to Milwaukee for Lynette's birthday. We had dinner at her house. Me and Lynette and Ray and their 2 kids, who were 7 and 9, and full of the particular energy of children who have been inside too long in winter. It was a good evening mostly. Ray was quieter than usual, which I had learned to find more unsettling than his usual noise. After the kids were in bed, when I was putting on my coat to leave, Ray said, I want to show you something. He pulled up something on his laptop at the kitchen table. It was a real estate listing, a 2-bedroom condo in a retirement community about 20 minutes outside the city. Nice place, he said. Independent living, but they have a full activities calendar. Indoor pool. It's actually a really good value for what you get. I looked at the screen for a moment, and then I looked at him. Ray, I said, are you suggesting I sell the lake house and move into a retirement community? I'm just saying the option exists, he said. At your age, with that much land to maintain alone. I'm 63. I know, but... I replaced a water heater last November. I replanked a dock. I split about 4 cords of wood. Dad, Lynette said softly, not to me but to him, a warning in it. Ray closed the laptop. I'm just thinking about what's practical, he said. I said goodnight, and I drove home. Over the next several weeks there were phone calls, not confrontational ones. Ray was too practiced for that. They were the kind of calls where he would ask how I was doing and mention, almost in passing, that his in-laws were really struggling, that Lynette was stressed, that the logistics of everything were getting complicated. He was laying groundwork. I recognized the technique because I had sat across from enough contractors over the years to know what it looked like when someone was softening a position before making a demand. The demand came in April. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was out on the dock when my phone rang. It was Lynette, and she was crying. Not angry, crying. Upset crying. The kind that sounds like it has been building for a while. Daddy, she said. She only called me that when something was wrong. Ray's parents need somewhere to go. They really do. His mom can barely get around, and his dad can't manage the house anymore, and we cannot fit them here. We just can't. And Ray said, he said that your place has the room, and you're alone, and he thought maybe. Lynette, I said, stop for a second. She stopped. Is this what you want? Not what Ray wants. What you want. There was a long pause. I want everyone to be okay, she said quietly. That's not what I asked. She didn't answer. I told her I loved her, and that I would think about it, and that I would call her back. I sat on the dock for a while after I hung up. The lake was flat and gray, and the tree line on the far shore was just starting to show green. A loon called somewhere out of sight, and then went silent. I wasn't angry. That surprised me a little. I had expected to be angry. But what I felt instead was something more like clarity. The kind you get when you have been watching something coming from a long way off, and it finally arrives and you realize you have already decided what to do. I had actually already started the process in January, after the February phone call, the first one, where Ray floated the idea of his parents using my second bedroom. I had made some calls of my own. I had spoken to the county land use office. I had spoken to a conservation attorney in Madison named Evelyn, who had been recommended to me by one of the men at the Thursday coffee group, a retired judge who knew everyone in the county worth knowing. What I had been putting in place was this: a conservation easement on my 12 acres. A conservation easement, for those who don't know, is a legal agreement between a landowner and a land trust or government entity. You donate certain development rights on your property permanently. You keep ownership. You can live there, improve the structures, leave it to your heirs, but you cannot subdivide it, cannot develop it commercially, and, critically, under the specific terms I had negotiated, cannot establish it as a multifamily or rental residence without voiding the easement and triggering significant legal and tax consequences. The easement had been finalized in late March. The land trust was a reputable one out of Madison that worked with private landowners throughout the state. I had received a federal tax deduction for the donated development rights that my accountant described with unusual warmth as genuinely excellent. The property was protected, not just from Ray's parents, from anyone, from any future pressure, any future scheme, any conversation that started with, "You've got all that room." I called Ray back that evening, not Lynette, Ray. I asked him if he had some time to talk. He said he did, and I could hear in his voice that he thought this was the conversation he had been steering toward for 2 months. "I've been thinking about what you and Lynette raised," I said, "and I want to be straightforward with you about where things stand." "I appreciate that," he said in his deal-closing voice. "I had a conservation easement placed on my property in March. It's been recorded with the county and filed with the land trust. Under the terms of the easement, the property cannot be used as a multifamily residence. That means I cannot have long-term occupants other than myself without being in violation of a binding legal agreement." The silence this time was different from his usual silences. "I didn't know you were doing that," he said finally. "You didn't need to," I said. "It's my property." "When did you? Why would you?" He stopped, started again. "Was this because of our conversation in February?" "It was because of my own plans for the land," I said. "I intend to leave it protected in perpetuity. That was always my intention. I've just made it legally binding now." There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing. "So you're saying there's literally nothing we can do," he said. "There's nothing to do," I said. "This isn't a negotiation, Ray. It never was. This is my home." Another pause. Then, very quietly, "Lynette is going to be upset." "Lynette will understand," I said. "She knows who I am." We said goodbye, and I set the phone down on the kitchen table and looked out the window at the lake. The light was doing something beautiful out there. The last of the evening sun going orange across the water. A pair of mergansers came in low and landed without a sound. Lynette called me 2 days later. Ray had told her, and she had been upset, yes, but not at me, or not entirely. There was something in her voice I hadn't heard in a long time. Something that sounded like relief. "He was so sure you'd say yes eventually," she said. "He was so sure." "I know," I said. "Daddy, did you know this whole time that you were going to do that?" "I knew I was going to protect the property," I said. "That was always the plan. I just made it official sooner than I might have." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "His parents found an assisted living facility about a week ago, in Racine. It's actually nice. He wanted your place to be the solution, so he didn't have to pay for the real one." I didn't say anything to that. "Are we okay?" she asked. "Lynette," I said, "you are my daughter. We are always okay." She came up to visit me in May with the kids, without Ray. We spent a weekend fishing off the dock and making too much food and letting the kids run the property until they were tired enough to sleep without argument. On the last morning, she sat next to me on the dock with her coffee, and we watched the mist come off the lake. "Mom would have loved it here," she said. "She would have," I said. "She really would have." The loons were nesting on the far side of the cove that spring, 2 of them, and they called to each other across the water in the early mornings in that way that sounds like longing and like joy at the same time. I would lie in bed and listen to them before I got up, and I would think that this was what I came here for. Not the square footage, not the waterfront appreciation, not the untapped equity. This. The loons calling in the mist, the quiet that belongs to no one but me. Carolyn had always said I was too patient for my own good. She meant it as a mild criticism. She was a woman who believed in saying things plainly. But patience isn't weakness. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to be rushed into someone else's version of your life. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is buy 12 acres in Wisconsin and make sure it stays yours. Ray called once more, about a month later. Not about the property. He called to tell me his parents had settled in at the facility in Racine and were doing well. He said it matter-of-factly, the way men like Ray communicate that a subject is closed. "I'm glad to hear it," I said. And I meant it. I hold no malice toward him. He is, in his way, simply a man who sees the world as a set of resources to be allocated. And it had never occurred to him that some things aren't resources. Some things are just yours. The easement paperwork sits in a fireproof box on the shelf in my study, next to a photograph of Carolyn from the year we got married, and a fishing lure she gave me as a joke one anniversary that I never used but never threw away. I take my coffee on the dock every morning the weather allows. I watch the lake. I listen. It's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything. There's a moment, somewhere in your 60s, when you realize that the people who try to take things from you rarely do it with malice. Ray didn't hate me. He just never once considered that I might have already thought further ahead than he had. That's the thing about men like Ray. They assume that quiet means empty, that patience means there's nothing behind it. I think about the February phone call sometimes. The practiced ease of it, the way he floated the idea like it was a favor he was doing me. Company for the old man. 2 bedrooms, only using one. He had arranged the logic so neatly, as though the conclusion were already obvious and I just hadn't caught up yet. And I remember sitting there in my dock, phone in hand, watching the ice at the edges of the lake, just beginning to pull back from the shore, and thinking, he doesn't know what I've already done. That's the thing I want to sit with because it matters. I didn't win because I got lucky, or because Ray made some clumsy mistake. I won because I had done the work, the legal work, the planning, the conversations with Evelyn, the hours reading through easement language that most people would find tedious past the point of tolerance. I had been thorough when there was no immediate reason to be thorough. That kind of preparation doesn't come from fear. It comes from knowing what you value and deciding ahead of time that you will protect it. Carolyn used to say I was a slow thinker. She meant it affectionately. What she meant was that I don't react fast, but I tend to end up somewhere considered. She was quicker than me, quicker to laugh, quicker to anger, quicker to forgive. I miss that about her, but I think she would have approved of how this went. Not because Ray was humbled, though I imagine she would have found some private satisfaction in that, but because I didn't compromise the place. I kept it what it was. There's a version of this story where I get angry in February and say something that damages my relationship with Lynette permanently. There's a version where I cave in April because she's crying and I can't bear it. There's a version where Ray gets his way and brings his parents up, and slowly, the way these things always go, slowly, the lake house stops being mine. I have watched that happen to other men. Good men who couldn't hold the line because they confused holding the line with being unkind. It isn't unkind to know what belongs to you. It isn't unkind to protect it. What would have been unkind to Lynette, to myself, even to Ray, was to let resentment build in silence while I gave away what I had worked a lifetime to earn. The real cruelty in those situations is never the refusal. It's the slow erosion of a person who stopped believing their own life was worth defending. I am 63 years old. I get up in the morning and I make coffee and I walk down to the dock. The loons are back this year. I can hear them before I'm halfway down the path. The easement paperwork is in its fireproof box. The 2nd bedroom stays empty. Lynette brings the kids up in summer, and we fish off the dock and eat too much and stay up too late. And Ray stays in Milwaukee, and we maintain a cordial and honest distance that works better for everyone than false warmth ever did. That's enough. That has always been enough. A man who knows what he has and keeps it. That's not stubbornness. That's just knowing the difference between a life worth living and the life slowly handed away.